If you enjoy our videos and podcasts and would like us to continue putting out regular quality content, head over to patreon.com/aircrewinterview, where you can donate monthly, and in return you will get rewards ranging from early interview viewings, bonus clips, credited as a producer, and much more. Thank you and enjoy.
Chivener, best station in the RAF.
I've heard that on many occasions.
We should never have given it up. North coast of Devon, flying the Hunters, great machines. And Chivener taught me, in my opinion, a very important lesson. And that was to land on speed on the numbers. Because the F6s we were flying didn't have drag chutes. If you landed and the runway was relatively short, if you landed on the numbers on speed, it was no big deal. If you landed fast or long, particularly if there was no wind, then you'd either go in with hot brakes, which was embarrassing, or you take the barrier at the end, which was even more embarrassing. And that was a fundamental flying lesson that I thought was important to learn, so I enjoyed that. I didn't like the T7.
Right.
It's a big cockpit, wide. The F6 was just lovely. There was a young Navy lieutenant who had a Wessex that he was flying. And when the loggies had put things onto ships, they just put them onto any old ship, saying we'll sort it out later. And so this young man was doing underslung loads from ship to ship to get things into the right place. Well, there wasn't a lot to do on Norland, so I hitched a ride with him on many days. He was happy because it gave him somebody to talk to. He was also happy because of the whirlwind experience and other helicopter stuff. I could fly the helicopter. He did all the difficult stuff, but I could actually just do all the easy stuff, which I enjoy doing, and he was more than happy to let me do. So that was good. The other two things as station commander, there's no point in having power if you don't abuse it occasionally, was we sent a Puma out to Malaysia to support an SAS exercise.
Okay.
I wanted to send two, but the bean counters wouldn't let us send two, so they only sent one, which I was concerned about because if you're supporting the SAS and you don't support them because your helicopter's US, it's bad for the Air Force, it's bad for the SAS, and it's just not a good thing.
Yeah.
But I was only allowed to send one. So I went out to visit them, and sure enough, when I got there, the helicopter was US. There's an earthing braid, about 12 inches long, maybe an inch wide, that connected the battery, I guess, to the airframe. And it had corroded and had started to smoke.
Oh.
So they stopped flying. It identified what the problem was, but it was something that had never ever failed, so therefore their flyaway pack didn't have one of these things in it. So they got onto OC Engineering at Larbrook and said, we need one of these. Either get one from stores or rob one from another aeroplane. He said, yep, we'll FedEx it, it'll be with you in 48 hours. Well, I happened to be out there when they said it's going to be 48 hours. I said, well, that's not good enough. You know, it's 2 days of not supporting the SAS. So I phoned up OC Engineering and I said, look, put it in somebody's hand luggage and courier it out. I said, I happen to know there's an aeroplane leaving in 3 hours from Dusseldorf that will be in first thing tomorrow morning at Kuala Lumpur. So he said, one of the advantages of delegated budget authority, he said, are you prepared to authorise it? I said, yes, of course I'm prepared to authorise it, as long as I can satisfy the expense to bean counters if asked, and I was quite happy to.
Yep.
I said, if you can't find somebody who can do that, let me know. He said, there's a queue forming outside my office as we speak. So we got this braided thing out. It took them, 20 minutes to fix it to the helicopters, and we were up and flying the next morning. So, you know, it was the right thing to do. I mean, the field deployments, just to go back to those, we were operating because we were forward deployed into the field, we were operating about 70 miles from where the simulated land battle was taking place. So 70 miles is 10 minutes flying. So you'd get airborne, go in a straight line, get your updated briefing from the forward air controller, one attack against the simulated target, straight back to the site, no faffing around in the circuit, because if you flew circuits, that gave away where the site was.
Yeah. So
you just simply do a straight in and land. So the sorties were 20-25 minutes. We were allowed to do a maximum of 6 sorties in a day, as long as you got out of the cockpit somewhere in that stretch of 6 sorties. If you stayed in the cockpit for all of them, you could only do 5.
Right.
And we used to stay in the cockpit because it was quicker to debrief and rebrief in the cockpit while the ground crew refueled and rearmed than it was to get the pilot out, go into the debrief, then rebrief, then get back to the aeroplane, then strap in. So we would stay in the cockpit, and in 4 days, this was my personal record, in 4 days I flew 23 sorties and amassed the grand total of 8 hours and 10 minutes. So you need to put that into context when you talk about 2,500 hours. It's an awful lot of sorties.
Brilliant, Peter.
The longest one I did was the UK to Ascension Island, which was a little over 9 hours. And that was, and the Harrier, the GR3, didn't have an autopilot. So you couldn't even do an altitude hold on it. You were literally flying it the whole time.
It's not a big copper either, is it?
Very sensitive aeroplane, so you couldn't even trim it out for very long before it would drop a wing or whatever. So yeah, that was the longest sortie I did.
A better beer was needed after that flight.
Yes.
But it sounds like the AV8 was a completely different beast from our Harriers.
It started off pretty similar. One of the problems that the Marine Corps hated was the inertial navigation and attack system.
Right.
It was, I mean, in fairness, you know, it was probably based on 1950s, maybe early 60s technology. It used rubber bands. It didn't have a digital map. It had a 35mm wet film map, which was fine if you were flying east-west. But if you went north-south, you'd come to the edge of the strip, and then there'd be a 30-second pause while it rewound itself and put you at the bottom of the next strip. And it was a sod to maintain.
I can imagine.
And the Marine Corps either didn't have the interest or the expertise or the time that they needed to put into maintaining it. So in their eyes, it was totally useless and totally unreliable. So they ripped it out. They didn't put the Laser Ranger on the front, I don't think. Certainly not on the sea. But they put a different weapons aiming system in, which worked. In the UK, we regularly practiced, and in Germany, regularly practiced dissimilar air combat against the Lightning. We did exchange with the German Air Force and flew against the 104, with the French Air Force and flew against the Mirage 3. When the Phantoms came in, we did it with the Phantoms. We'd go down to ACMI, Air Combat Manoeuvring, which was in Sardinia. And flying against F-15s and F-16s was a wee bit depressing. But they were different generation, and they were designed for that. We'd fight against the Dutch F-16s, and again, that was depressing. The Dutch are really good, and they knew how to operate their aeroplanes. There's a huge difference between flying an aeroplane and operating. The Dutch knew how to operate their F-16s. And as I say, that was quite depressing. Tornadoes, yes, a bit. What else? Out in the States, F-14s, F-15s, F-16s, all the usual panoply of fighters.
Amazing.
But I quit. I'd retired before the Typhoon and that lot had got going.
Yeah.
The AH-1 was, well, actually they were both great helicopters, but the AH-1 was particularly good. And we worked up and did a lot of air combat against an AIM-9 armed AH-1.
Right.
Now, that was interesting. I was restricted to low level because it would have been unfair to come in at 30,000 feet against a target defended by a helicopter. So it was a simulated poor weather scenario. And against an AIM-9 equipped helicopter, I learned that you run in 500 knots plus, you attack the target, and you keep going in a straight line till you're at least 10 miles away before you even think of turning around and coming back.
Yeah.
Because if you drop your bomb and turn, you're dead. Even if he hadn't seen you on the ingress, as soon as your bomb goes off, that will attract his attention. So he knows approximately where you are. And if you turned, he can turn a whole lot tighter than you will ever turn. He hasn't got the speed, but the AIM-9 has. So we did a lot of that, and they decided to have a go at firing one. And all the negative people said, oh, you can't do that, it'll fall off the rails and hit the desert. And they said, well, we don't think it will. So they ran a trial, which I went out to watch, and they had this AIM-9 Lima with a telemetry head, so not a warhead, telemetry head, and they flew an F-86 drone over the top of it, about 1,000 feet higher, and he fired this AIM-9, and it came off the rails, and it went straight up to the F-86, and it took off its starboard wing at the wing root.
Really?
And that was the end of that F-86. So it was proven
it worked.
It worked. That's another thing. If you look at the probe behind, another masterful piece of aerodynamic engineering. You see the refueling probe. It's like a sort of drain pipe that sticks into the top left of the intake.
Yep.
Well, obviously, when that was first put on, somebody decided that didn't look very professional, so they put that little aerodynamic fairing on it.
Right.
So it looks a lot prettier.
Yes.
The downside of that, when you've got a probe on, if you pull G, that generates lift.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think of that.
And it rolls the aeroplane.
Right, yeah.
So if you're combating with a probe on, you've got to use a boot full of rudder and aileron to stop an unwanted roll. I mean, they could have put a matching aerodynamic shape on the starboard side, but that was obviously thinking too far ahead.
Yeah. So, Peter, there's also a story about a pink Harrier. Can you tell us about this?
Yes. We did a squadron exchange with the French Air Force at Dijon. They were flying Mirage 3s, and their squadron symbol on the fin of their Mirage was a swan. And I think it was the penultimate evening, one of our ground crew painted a caricature Harrier behaving badly on the back of this swan, which we thought was rather good. The French appeared totally nonplussed by it, so they stood in their hangar, Gauloise in mouth, under the Défense de Fumée sign. Not much reaction, so we thought, oh well, never mind. That night we put on a farewell party for them, and a couple of the pilots came in slightly late and were clearly a little bit agitated, but we didn't think anything of it. And the next morning was a grey, drizzly, miserable morning, and we were in this minibus driving down to the flight line. And as we were driving down the flight line, there was the two-seat Harrier, which we thought was G-VTOL. G-VTOL in those days was in Middle East camouflage.
Right.
Presumably on a sales push, I don't know. And we thought, what's G-VTOL doing here? And as we got closer, we realised it wasn't G-VTOL, it was our two-seat Harrier. And the French had painted it pink and white all over. They'd obviously had some inside assistance, because all of the static vents and the other things which would need to be covered for a paint job like that had been.
Of course.
So they'd had a little bit of assistance. And I was programmed to fly it back to Wittering. And I assumed that the squadron commander would say, right, take your pictures, I now want 1 million Frenchmen on that, turning it green again. And he said, no, he says, we'll fly it back pink. So I said, well, presumably you'll be flying it back pink. He said, no, we'll fly it as programmed. So I had to fly it back to Wittering. We had our USAF exchange pilot in the boot. And when we got to Wittering, the weather at Wittering was terrible. So the radar approaches. And for some reason, the station commander was up in the tower watching the recovery. Station commander and I hadn't got on hugely well up to that point, not for flying reasons, for other reasons. I landed on the easterly runway. One squadron was parked off the eastern end of the runway, so it was land on the runway, slow down, taxi in, 30 seconds, come to a halt. And as I came to a halt on chocks, the station commander's car screeched to a halt in front of me. And I thought, oh dear. And sure enough, when he saw me get out of the aeroplane, he was convinced that this was all of my doing. And honestly, my lud, I'm innocent, it wasn't me.
So you didn't get a mulligan?
Oh yeah, I got a
Oh, I got
Burger
a
King. I was used to it from him.
Yeah, yeah.